Welcome to the Dynasty Dojo. What's going on, guys? Jay Santos here, lead commish with my main man, Dougie Fresh. How you doing, boy?
What's up, dudes?
Sound a little somber over there.
Yeah, man, the season came to an end last weekend for me. I'm never going to be happy about it.
Never going to be happy about it, but, I mean, you had a good showing. You proved me wrong. You know, I didn't think you were going to be up there for title contention. You were actually the number 2 seed. I think it was a successful season for you, and you know, looking at the future, it's going to be pretty good.
The injury bug finally got me there at the end. It was just too much to overcome.
Yeah, you really needed to carry on. Even like a couple of your bench guys like Austin Eckler were hurt, so it was tough. It was tough sledding for you, especially going against the Beaties. But we'll get into that matchup in a little bit. So yeah, guys, this is championship week, and it's also a week where, you know, this is the semis in the losers bracket. So we got a couple big games. Looking forward to going into depth about these matchups, because these are things that are gonna help or hurt teams in both the present and the future. So here we go. Here goes the rundown. We're going to go over our betting locks review. We're going to go over the semis and the winners bracket in the first round of the losers bracket. The betting, or actually, we're going to go over our board bets and how those stacked up over the course of the season, waiver wire moves, week 16 matchups, and then finally wrapping up this week's betting locks of the week. So speaking of betting locks of the week, our previous week's betting locks, we did okay. We didn't lose money, so we did okay. You know, I went 1-1-1. I got the Atlanta game right. That game was over after the first quarter. New Orleans, they just look like a different team, so I didn't get that one right. And then Baltimore, that one pushed at -8. Meanwhile, on your end, you went 4-3-1. So you made
Correct.
out. You made
Yeah,
out.
we did okay.
Any of your matchups that stand out?
No, I mean, Utah State was the best pick on the board. Should have been absolutely piped. I was way wrong on New England. Dallas, after we recorded, I did a little bit more thinking on it, and that was always the wrong side. But all in all, we'll take a 4-3-1 week.
Yeah, making money. At least you're not losing money. So we look at our records for the season so far. You know, we started doing this after week 9, I think. But I'm 12-5-1, and Doug is a very, very respectable 23-14-3. Our week 15 recap. So the winner bracket matchups were Doug versus the Beaties and myself versus Timmy. So we'll go into your matchup versus the Beaties, and as we discussed on your team's end, you know, you were trotting out the best that you possibly could, but the injury bug did catch up to you. Didn't have a lot of guys, you know, blow up. I know we talked about how you needed Travis Kelce, Mahomes, and Amari Cooper to have great games in order for you to, you know, to sort of hide the theoretics or Chris Ivory's that you were thinking about putting in your matchup. So it didn't work out. And on Beatty's end, you know, they got carried by the guys that we assumed were going to carry them, and they were, you know, they were studs in Todd Gurley, Christian McCaffrey, and then the Mike Williams thing came out of nowhere. But so that gets me a little nervous. But anything else you got to add about this?
No, I mean, this one was over on Thursday when Mike Williams went for the same amount of points as Mahomes, Hill, and Travis Kelce. That was the end of the road.
Yeah, that was tough to watch. I'm assuming from your end, but again, productive season on your side, so nothing to be too ashamed about. Now, when going into my matchup with Timmy, oh man, it felt good to beat Timmy. Felt good to beat Timmy. I definitely was not feeling good after I saw Keenan Allen go out of the game and putting up a nice donut for me. However, in that same game, I had Damian Williams, who scored 27 points and really made up for Keenan Allen being gone. But as I mentioned before, in regards to our week preview from last week, I know I mentioned that the guys I needed to ride in this matchup were Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon, and I was fortunate to get some of their best performances of the year behind those guys. Add that with Damian Williams, and that really carried my team. But on Timmy's side, although Derrick Henry has been really helping a lot of teams in other leagues push their team to a fantasy championship, he just really didn't get much production from the rest of his team. Yeah, Alvin Kamara had a great game, but at that point, the matchup was already over. So it was a matchup that I thought was going to be a little bit closer. But I think if anyone saw this matchup from the get go last week, they would have thought that it was a closer matchup as well. What do you think?
Yeah, the year analysis was good. I mean, it was a great spot for Dalvin Cook and for Joe Mixon. You got a nice day from Julio. Probably you were a little worried when Keenan Allen went out in the first quarter of that Thursday night game. That wasn't positive for your prospects, but you were able to get over it. The Damian Williams thing was huge for you. On Timmy's side, really, it came down to a couple guys who he had gotten quite a bit from in the earlier parts of the season in Thielen and in Jared Cook. And those guys just came up a little small for him. And on top of that, Roethlisberger only going for 13 points. If he gets slightly bigger games from those three guys, he's right in it because of Kamara and Gus Edwards and Derrick Henry kind of carrying the load. It wasn't the worst week for Timmy. It was just those couple guys who really came up pretty small.
Yeah, you hit that pretty spot on when we talked last week about Timmy's side. You said that in order for it to be a close matchup, he needed those guys to perform. So it was just unfortunate for him that it was a couple of their worst weeks that they had right there. Going into the losers bracket matchups, now we had Tommy versus Scotty, and then Brian versus the Barretts. We'll go into Brian versus the Barretts right now since I have that up. And don't know what happened with Brian's side. He had Lamar Miller get hurt. Chris Godwin put up a donut. The Rams defense didn't do well, but collectively, he didn't really have anyone do well. Antonio Brown got a touchdown, but it was less than 50 yards. I mean, the Antonio Brown and Michael Thomas games, those are outliers. That shouldn't happen on a consistent basis, but everybody else did not show up on that side. And then on the Barrett side, I mean, they were kind of fortunate that they were going against Brian because they didn't have that great of a game. Alshon Jeffrey was, a pretty good player, 8 receptions for 160 yards, but everybody else is pretty much single digits. Justin Jackson was a nice 1-week filler, but this was an ugly matchup. We said it was going to be a low-scoring game. I didn't think it was going to be this low, but Kevin won, and he's moving on to the semis of the losers bracket. Go on.
All right, as far as the matchup between Brian and Kev, not a ton to really go over here. Brian with just a historically pitiful 54 points. Don't know that I've actually ever seen anything like it from a guy who actually tried to start a legitimate lineup. I'm just going to highlight a couple players here, not from a matchup perspective, but just from an overall perspective. Jarvis Landry, that's got to be one of the more disappointing. Listen, he's going to finish the season as a high end wide receiver three, but everybody who owned him was expecting more out of him. And, another week puts up 5.2 in a fairly decent matchup. You wonder, is Baker that good that he just spreads the ball, or is maybe Landry not what we thought he was, when he played in Miami? Another one in this matchup, Michael Thomas, he got off the start of the year like gangbusters. And now he's just sprinkled in a lot of these, a 5, a 6, a 15, and then an 8. Another guy who you kind of you think you can lean on as that, really top tier option at wide receiver, and he's kind of let people down, specifically Brian in this matchup. On the other side, for Maddie and Kev, Cam Newton is something's wrong, and it's disappointing. You hate to see a guy with his talent just not be able to perform due to some sort of physical limitation. I guess you got to kind of pat him on the back and say thanks for trying, but that really hurt them down the stretch. Outside of that, this is you look at these two rosters and you see why they're in the position that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, I said it a few weeks ago when we talked about, our bet, which we'll go into in a little bit, about how I didn't think you were a playoff contender, and it was because I figured these two teams would be not only playoff contenders, but actually make noise in a championship game. They have all the players that should be performing well or should have performed well, like Jarvis Landry, like a couple of these other guys on Kevin's team.
Leonard Fournette, like Mark Ingram, like Mike Evans.
Evan Ingram, and it didn't happen. So this year, was unfortunate for both of those teams, but I can't see this leading over to next year as well. But I was wrong this year, so who knows? I could be wrong about next year as well. So the bye weeks of this past week was Nick and Sean. They got a first-round bye from the losers bracket, so they'll be playing in the semis of the losers bracket, which we'll get to in a little bit. So talking about our Week 15 picks, Doug and I both had the same picks, and we both went 4-1. So I finished off this week at 50-25. Doug's at 39-36. I was this week's top performer at 142.4, and as Doug mentioned, Brian came in with a very pitiful performance of 54.3. So I touched on a couple seconds ago the board bets. Now, I had a few different board bets throughout the season, or from the beginning of the season, that I made with a few people, and just going over these, we'll start off with my 4 that I had with you. So I said that Sammy Watkins was for sure going to have over 780 yards receiving. He got hurt multiple times throughout the year, and you won that one. So that was a good call by you. And that's where your good calls end, because after that, we've already discussed numerous times the Devontae Freeman outscore Saquon Barkley bet. That was a poor bet by you, so I won that one. The Baker Mayfield is going to have a higher points per game than Russell Wilson. I took Russell Wilson, you took Baker Mayfield, and although the averages come out similar, Baker needs to outscore Russell Wilson by 28 points this week in order for you to win that one. So you should win that one comfortably.
He does play Cincinnati.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Listen, I'll just chime in on this one. This one's interesting to me because Baker Mayfield has actually turned out to be a better NFL quarterback than he has fantasy asset. And I think if you asked a lot of people that question going into the year, it would have been the reverse of that situation. So, I don't know how I could have pegged that. He's really good at quarterback, and he spreads it around, and he makes calls at the line, and he gets in the proper running plays, and he's 30 years, and it didn't really translate into fantasy production. Now, maybe it will in the future, but I still.
I'm losing you a couple times, but I think I got your point. I agree with most of what you said because I only heard about half of it. But I I think Baker Mayfield is going to be a problem for my Pittsburgh Steelers for years to come. And
Let me ask.
are you still going?
Let me ask you a conversation early on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Let me ask you this. We talked about this early on. If you could redo the Lamar Jackson pick, do you wish you took Baker?
No, because just like how what you said when you mentioned that he's performed better in real life than in fantasy, I could say the opposite about Lamar Jackson. He's performed better in fantasy than he has in real life. And since we're playing fantasy football, I'm going to take the guy that is performing better in regards to
Do
fantasy.
you think that do you think that persists next year, 2 years, 3 years?
I don't think that Lamar Jackson can get worse. Do I think that Baker Mayfield can get better? Yes. Do I think he's going to get amazingly better next year? Maybe not amazingly better, but yes, I could see him perform better than Lamar Jackson next year. But the consistency that Lamar Jackson gives you when it comes to fantasy, he gives you a consistent 70 yards rushing every single game. If he can just throw one, two touchdowns, if he could throw two touchdowns a game, now you're talking about 24 points per game. And again, he looks terrible throwing the ball, but I mean, there's been other quarterbacks that haven't looked great initially throwing the ball and have gotten better. Like Kirk Cousins, his first couple years as starter, no one thought. If I told you Kirk Cousins was going to get an $80 million fully guaranteed contract at some point in his career after his first season of being starter, no one would have believed that. And it happened. So, not saying it's going to happen with Lamar Jackson, but because his floor is pretty high, especially for a rookie coming in mid-season and playing, that's why I think he can be up there with Baker next year, although I think Baker's going to be a little bit better.
All right, so I was going to propose that we start next year's board bets now, and I was going to take Baker and offer you Lamar, but it sounds like you're smarter than that.
Well, I mean, as we go through these bets, I've proven to be smarter than you as I won 3 out of our 4 bets. So we'll move on to the other one that I beat you in, and that was Jay has a better regular season record than Doug. And I gave you that when you had a 2-game lead on me after, I think it was 3 weeks. Actually, you had a 1-game lead on me, so I won that one. That one really didn't really have anything to do with fantasy analysis. I just knew that I was going to end up with a better record than you. Go on.
I didn't know that. I don't remember when we made that bet, so good on you. I figured I was probably losing when we made that bet, but
No, you were definitely up, but I digress. So I had another 2 bets with Brian. He bet me that Larry Fitzgerald was not going to be a top 25 wide receiver. I thought for sure Larry Fitzgerald was going to be a top 25 receiver. So Brian wins that bet unless Larry Fitz goes for like 30 points next week. So that's a good win for Brian. But Brian, with the aforementioned Jarvis Landry, I bet him that Stephon Diggs was going to outscore Jarvis Landry, and I won that bet. Speaking of Diggs, real quick, even though Thielen has scored more points, do you still think he's the better wide receiver out of the 2?
no, probably not. I think Diggs kind of proved me wrong a little bit this year. He played more consistently this year, even though he still had some quiet games. I guess everybody does. I can't hold that against him. And definitely as the second half of the season progressed, I think Diggs proved asset. I think he does benefit from how good of a start to the season Thielen had. I think to look at games like the Patriots, teams were kind of focusing more on Thielen than they were Diggs, which was different this year than last year. But yeah, he's probably the better talent. I think it's still fairly close in terms of who's a better wide receiver.
I think that I've always thought that Diggs was the better wide receiver. I think in order for you to be an outside wide receiver, teams game plan to shut down a outside or perimeter wide receiver than they do for a slot wide receiver. So teams were focusing more so on Diggs earlier in the year, so that's why Thielen had a very, very productive early start of the season. They adjusted defenses, adjusted their schemes, and that's why Diggs has performed better than Thielen. But I just don't think that you can surround your offense to go through a slot receiver to be the focal point unless you're Julian Edelman or Wes Welker with Tom Brady. You need to be with an elite quarterback in order for that to happen. And even still with that, you still need a premier playmaker such as a Gronk in order for that to turn out great. So I still think that Diggs is the better talent, just like what you mentioned, out of the two. And then my last one was between me and Scotty, and he said that Zeke wouldn't finish the year as a top 10 running back, and Zeke's gone on to lead the league in rushing yards. So I won that easily.
The only thing I'll say on that one is Scott was actually right until Jason Garrett realized how bad he had been coaching the team and got kind of put on blast and put on the hot seat, and then they just started feeding him. So you were right, but Scotty wasn't all that wrong when the wager took place.
No, his idea was that I think the Cowboys had a losing record, and he said there's no way that a running back could be top 10 on a losing squad, which is a fair point. But we're talking about a guy like Zeke Elliott who has never shown us to not be productive. So, yes, you're right. Scotty had his points, but in the end, I got that one right. And when it comes to records, I went 5-2, you went 1-3, Brian went 1-1, and Scotty went 0-1. So waiver moves, I didn't update this from Wednesday, but a few of the moves were the Beaties picked up John Kelly, I picked up Rod Smith, Brian picked up Tim Patrick, Ryan Tannehill, and Darren Sproles. The Barretts picked up the Browns defense, and Nick picked up Robert Foster. I will also say that Nick also picked up, I think it was Chris Hogan a couple days ago or yesterday. And didn't you pick up someone as well, Cannon?
Yeah, I may have picked up Trenton Cannon because I have McGuire, and I figure that gives me a fair chance to have the starting running back for the Jets next year, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, if they don't draft someone or sign Le'Veon Bell, which I heard that they may be one of the top two teams to get him. But any one of these guys stand out to you?
Rod Smith. Who the fuck is Rod Smith?
You know exactly who he is.
That's the Cowboys guy. I don't know why I was confused there for a second. You have Zeke in this?
I do not. I picked him up. I picked him up because I was hoping for an Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah, I can hear you. I picked him up because I was hoping for an Emmanuel Sanders practice injury, and all of a sudden I had a top, RB2 running back. So that didn't work out.